Dear listeners, welcome to the Eco-lecture series on green solutions for a resilient future. It is presented to you in the framework of the Green Climate Action Month, a series of inspiring online events organized by the Committee for Environmental Protection under the government of the Republic of Tajikistan and GIZ, the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit. The climate is changing and it affects all of us. Tajikistan will experience higher temperatures, more frequent mud flows, floods and droughts. At the same time, Tajikistan is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in Europe and Central Asia, and natural resources play a key role in people's livelihoods. In today's lecture, we will present you a concept on how to sustainably manage land resources in the long run. We will present you with the theoretical framework as well as with successful examples of truly sustainable land management in Tajikistan. What is Illuma? Illuma stands for Integrative Land Use Management Approaches and is a conceptual framework for successful land use management. Sustainable land management is especially important under a changing climate, which can play a key role in the required response and adaptation to climate change. Land resources, as pastures or forest, present the production base for the most of the Central Asian inhabitants. Livestock keeping, production of agricultural crops, fruits, nuts and forest products constitute the main source of income for the rural population. However, the productivity of these natural resources is jeopardized by increasing land degradation due to several reasons, such as, for example, increasing population of livestock with subsequent overgrazing of pastures, deforestation and poor management of forest resources, increasing extreme climate events and other negative impacts related to climate change, as well as increased use of water for irrigation systems with subsequent salinization of soils and competition for drinking water. Where do we come from? Our challenges and prospects. The management of different land resources is always interdependent or even stands in conflict to each other, as for instance, grazing in forest areas or the competition over the same water source. We cannot regard them separately and always must look at the bigger picture, at the whole landscape. In most cases, the lessons learned and experiences of the interventions and the approaches on land use end up not being used outside of the interventions from which they have emerged. In Central Asia, there are numerous experiences on sustainable management of land resources, in particular on pastures, forests, orchards, and arable cropland. These experiences need to be scaled. Further, Central Asian countries might have specific contexts. Nonetheless, challenges for land use are very similar and call for regional learning, exchange, and setting a common framework. You might ask yourself, what is the purpose of a conceptual and operational framework, and what can it be used for? With Illuma, you create a common understanding and vision. It serves as a framework to develop sector policies. It is a framework to design new programs. It is a tool to disseminate innovative approaches. It is as well a framework for monitoring and evaluation. And finally, it serves as a knowledge management tool. Now, let's look at the conceptual framework. Illuma consists of 8 dimensions, which I will be explaining to you following. Dimension number 1 is competence development. Strengthening core competencies of key stakeholders for better performance is key. Dimension number 2 is knowledge management. We constantly improve knowledge management and foster ongoing learning to adapt better to climate change. Third dimension is planning and monitoring. Developing best fit planning, implementation and monitoring instruments, structures and processes. For example, when planning a new program or monitoring its success, this framework shall help consider all aspects of sustainable land use management. Dimension number 4 is organizational development. Here we strengthen and develop effective organizations and help support their organizational mechanisms. Fifth dimension is the socio-cultural relations. we always have to take socio-cultural relations and cultures into account as they build the strong foundations for integrative land use management. For example, every village comes with its own structure, way of life, and potentially with conflicts. You need to take into account the culture and their way of living and adapt your approach to the special needs you find on the ground. Dimension number 6 is institutions and institutionalization. Building strong institutions, institutionalizing core processes is essential. Sustainable land use not only depends on the techniques on the ground, but also on the backbone, the institutions and legal framework supporting land users to adapt their systems. Emphasizing economic viability and fostering economic development by sustainable investments. People depend strongly on natural resources for their livelihood. Every land use approach needs to provide economic benefits for the land users, so it's feasible to be maintained in the future. Sometimes we have to deal with trade-offs between the most suitable solution for the nature and the most suitable solution for the local communities. Last but not least, dimension number 8 is environmental conditions. We consciously need to know and integrate environmental conditions and functions into land use management. And this brings us to our next slide, where we look at how climate impacts Tajikistan. In addition to the widespread degradation of productive land resources, climate change will further increase pressure upon the Central Asian countries, which makes it even harder to sustain their production bases. Forecasts of climate change effects predict multiple threats, including extreme temperatures, retreat of glaciers, and changes in precipitation patterns that will change the hydrology of mountain rivers and cause shortages of water, droughts, and floods. We will face higher temperatures. Compared to the last 30 years, the annual mean temperature is projected to rise between 1.3 degrees and 6.3 degrees by 2080, depending on the future greenhouse gas emission scenario. Under the highest emission scenario, its multi-model mean temperature, here depicted as the colored line, will increase approximately by 1.7 degrees in 2030, 3.1 degrees in 2050, and up to 5.4 degrees in 2080. Let's look at how Tajikistan will look like in 2050. The annual mean temperature is projected to increase significantly. Depending on the scenarios applied, these changes are more or less severe, although the projected increase will be substantial regardless. These maps present the lower and upper estimate of change in temperature in Tajikistan for 2050 compared to the present conditions based on 2 climate change scenarios. But we will not only face higher temperatures, we will also have more intensive rainfalls. Heavy precipitation events, in the form of snow or rain, are expected to become more intense, especially in springtime. Here you see extreme precipitation predicted that is above 20 millimeters per day. Now, after having looked at the conceptual framework and the climate change impact in Tajikistan, let's look at some experiences. The Illuma conceptual framework is based on experiences GIZ has made in the past in cooperation with its political partner, the Committee for Environmental Protection under the government of the Republic of Tajikistan, and its subordinate institution, the National Biodiversity and Biosafety Center, as well as with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Agency for Forestry under the government of the Republic of Tajikistan. These land use management approaches are forest, pasture and wildlife management, as well as biodiversity enhancing land use practices. Integrative forest management. Successful forest management requires a multi-level and multi-dimensional approach. Piloting integrative forest management approaches based upon rehabilitation, protection, afforestation and reforestation is as important as supporting appropriate forest governance and management structures, which enable sustainable forest use, planning and monitoring of forest-based economic development. On the following pictures, you see forest users during practical training, such as pruning and planting trees. The second land use management approach is pasture management. Due to the land degradation and overgrazing, the area of pastures has decreased since independence. Yet the livestock numbers have increased by over 65% and is now the main driver for overgrazing. In pasture management, both the techniques, such as planting the right pasture plants, as well as the governance over the land resources, are very important. In Tajikistan, GIZ has supported the establishment of a pasture management networking platform that supports the governance of pasture resources, connecting local pasture users with policymakers. The next land use approach is agrobiodiversity. Biodiversity in agriculture provides a multitude of ecosystem services, such as nutrient cycling, soil fertility, water conservation, and pollination, all vital for environmental sustainability and human well-being. The livelihood and food security of many citizens, particularly rural communities, depend heavily on the biodiversity of agricultural landscapes. But biodiversity is under threat due to overuse, mismanagement, and climate change. The success factors for agrobiodiversity are not only the technical solutions on the ground, but also the governance. On this picture, you can see one of the techniques for conserving biodiversity, called intercropping. Last but not least, let's look at wildlife management. Sustainable wildlife management is about the conservation of wild animals and their sustainable use. This is achieved by regulating hunting of wildlife through the issuing of permits exclusive to an assigned area. Important success factors for this approach to wildlife management are long-term rights for the hunting concessions to bring the communities a minimum economic benefit to sustain their livelihoods. In wildlife management, you need to ensure the participation of direct users, such as local communities, and establish a close cooperation with state authorities and the scientific community. Further, capacity development on technical and management skills for the responsible governmental institution and the local user groups is essential. To summarize this presentation, let's come to our key message. Integrative land management enables sustainable management by helping to understand landscape as ecosystems and addressing complex interaction between different land use dimensions. Why do we need this in Central Asia? In Central Asia, a significant part of the population lives in rural areas and directly depends upon land resources and its respective ecosystem services. Land degradation and climate change are severe challenges for sustainable land use management. However, sustainable land use can significantly contribute to achieving the targets of the nationally determined contributions under the International Climate Change Agreement, the Paris Agreement, and they can help to cut future emissions. Adaptation to and mitigation of climate change in the land use sector, however, requires an integrative, multidimensional approach. And how are we doing this? Illuma provides a multidimensional conceptual framework for planning, implementation, monitoring, and knowledge management. GIZ has a number of successful experiences in integrative land use management that can be scaled, specifically in forest, pasture and wildlife management, as well as in agrobiodiversity. Information on activities on environment and climate by the Committee for Environmental Protection under the Government of the Republic of Tajikistan can be found on the website touchnature.tj, and additional information on biodiversity on the website of the National Biodiversity and Biosafety Center, biodiv.tj. More information on the conceptual framework and how to apply it in your work, and details on our experiences in integrative land use management you find in this publication. The publication is available in English and Russian language. If you want to learn more about adaptation to climate change, we recommend you listening to the Eco lecture on ecosystem-based adaptation to climate change. Thank you very much for your attention. We hope that you enjoyed this introduction to our work. Please feel free to contact us for any questions or exchange. We are happy to hear from you. Till then, all the best and stay tuned on other activities during the Green Climate Action Month via the Facebook page of the Committee for Environmental Protection. Thank you.